Welcome to session 8. And now up, we welcome back Brendon Reid, who's the director of Reid Define. It's good this year that I got his company name right. Last time I made a little mistake. Didn't pronounce it properly, which I'm good at pronouncing stuff. But today, Brendon's going to talk about maximising the power of and effective information management in Archicad. And from my perspective, I look at this, and this is the next step for all practices as they move forward in their development journey of Archicad. The first step I always look to advise people on is getting their geometry right in terms of making sure you can learn to model things effectively. So how can you embrace getting things modeled correctly? And so embracing those tools and how we can actually get that accuracy correct. Step 2 is then moving into how we can then handle the additional information that's required to then essentially accelerate the capabilities of Archicad. So I now hand over to Brendon to talk to you about how you can maximise the potential or power of Archicad with information management. So take it away, Brendon.
Thanks, Nathan. Right, I'm going to be giving you a presentation on maximising the power of Archicad through effective information management. And it's a pretty generic title, and I'm sure you all looked at it and went, Nathan gave me about 24 hours to come up with a title, so I did. At the time, I didn't know exactly what I was going to be presenting, but I knew it was going to be around information management. It's an area, it's a topic that I'm passionate about, and I think there's real value in it for everyone. One thing I've seen a lot in what I do, which I'll get into in a second, is people not knowing what they don't know. So if you don't know the opportunities that are there for you, then how do you know how to take advantage of them? Hence why you should be attending more events like this, because people like us really want to share and to give you guys insight into how others are using it or how you may use it to your benefit. So we're going to talk specifically about a number of tools within Archicad that can provide you ways to manage your information better. The tools are not new. Tools have been around for a while. Just hopefully the way that we're using them or the way I'm using them may be new. So without any further ado, let's have a look and get into it. So my name's Brendon. I have a consulting business called Redefine. I'm based in Sydney, and I provide Archicad consulting services to people who are looking to improve the way they work, people who are looking at investing in their staff, and want to be more effective, more competitive in the industry. They come to me. Now, I've been working prior to my consulting business. I've worked in various architectural offices across Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and I actually had a stint in the US, but not in an architectural sense. I was managing a hotel on South Beach. For those who know Miami, it's a pretty cruisy part of the world. But I started my journey in Archicad in 1994. So I've been using it for a long time. This tool is nearly 30 years of history I have with this. I've been in all sorts of capacities in these practices and practice sizes of various types, from 5 persons up to 150 persons. In fact, I did a stint at Lend-Lease before starting my consulting company. There was 120 in our internal business unit, and I was managing a team of 10. Vast experience, project typologies, vast roles from project leadership, architecture to strategic BIM management kind of roles. So very broad. I'm getting old. You can see it in my grey hair. So lots of experience to share. And this is my consulting business, Redefine, that I started about 4 years ago. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first give you a bit of an introduction into this session. So what we're going to do, synopsis. You're going to learn how to harness Archicad's information management tools to streamline workflows, increase efficiency, and improve project outcomes. You'll also discover best practices for organising and utilising information in Archicad to drive projects forward from setup to delivery. The 3 learning objectives, I'm sure you would have seen on Nathan's Skewed website, is you're going to understand the importance of effective information management in Archicad, explore the tools and features available for managing information in Archicad, and applying best practices for organising and utilising information in Archicad projects. Pretty generic learning objectives there, but effective, important, right? The agenda for my presentation is in 3 parts. The first part we have just completed, so 1 down, 2 to go. The second session is going to be theoretical in PowerPoint, just presenting the various tool sets I'm going to demo in the third part of the presentation, which is a live demonstration, which will look at best practices for organising and utilising information. And when we talk about information, it's important to consider that information isn't just data that sits in fields. It's also naming. It's also geometry. It's also a lot of things for a lot of people. So don't ever get confused that information just means the fire rating in a wall, right? It means a whole broad range of things. Right. Let's have a look at each of these tools. Properties. So properties are optional, user-defined data assigned to an element or building material to provide additional searchable information. Pretty key. And that's probably a copy straight out of Graphisoft's user guide, in fact. Really flexible, host arrays of information, and the real value of that information is that it's inherent in the element that you assign the information to. And the great thing about this data is that it can be represented in schedules, it can be labeled, and it can also be exported into IFC property sets, which is also pretty good. And then, of course, combined with graphic overrides, it can invoke a visual response. So that, the fire rating that you have in the wall can be used as criteria inside a graphic override that looks at that particular value and says, oh, I exist. I'm going to change the color because that's what the graphic override tells me to do. So that's pretty clever. And I use that a lot for quality assurance purposes. I do lots of quality assurance purposes where we make everything nice, transparent grey and highlight things in red or blue or green, or depending on how important it is. And they really highlight where the issues are, which is excellent. One thing that really needs to be reiterated time and time again is that properties are only available to elements that are classified. If you do not classify an element, then you're not going to get properties available to you. So just keep hammering that into people. Another thing worth noting is if you're in an old project, or should I say, if you're in a new project and you want to copy and paste elements from an old project, as in legacy project, don't. First thing, don't. If you have to, if you must, always do it with care. Preferably do it through a donkey file, through a secondary file, which is a copy of your template, and then do any changes or do any stripping out of attributes from that before bringing it into your new project, if you absolutely have to. But also just bear in mind that it's not just attributes that come with elements, like lines and fills and surfaces and building materials and the like, layers. It's not just those that come with it, but properties also come with it too. So if you're copying and pasting from an old Archicad project like Archicad 22, for example, there was an old classification system that was used in those earlier versions. And if you copy and paste those elements from those projects, those whole classification systems come in to your file, as well as some of those properties that were associated to those elements. And it does get a little bit confusing for people, especially now that people are starting to use properties more. Then they go into the classifications, they go into properties, and they go, hold on, where did all these ones come from? I don't recognize those. They're strange to me. So just be mindful of that. Be very aware of that. We talk about attribute bloat. We talk about attributes, copying and pasting elements. Big no-no because of that. Properties and classifications are also in that as well. So just be aware of that, okay? And don't copy and paste between projects. Okay, expressions. Expressions are available to you in properties. So they are kind of a value definition of property. So it's not just a field that information can be entered into, but it's a calculation that can perform various functions, information, or in fact functions that were really only available once in GDL. So in library objects. So, if you're a coder and you coded library objects, then you had this ability to be able to do that, which was awesome if you knew how to do it, but terrible if you didn't. Now you have that ability to be able to do it, which is pretty good. So you can get access to other property information, some parameters, get access to hot links, hot link names, that kind of thing, zones, global settings like project info. So you can get access to a lot of that information, and then you can perform a calculation to give you another output. They function very similar to Excel formulas. So if you can search for the particular thing you want in Excel, then you should be able to translate it into the expression editor. So what they can also do is provide the ability to slice and dice information. So there are various logical functions inside it that you can start asking, if this condition is met, then do that, which is really handy. And if you perhaps want to split some information, so if you have two pieces of data you want the first part of in isolation, this is where you would do it. And we're going to have a look at those in action in my demo. Really powerful stuff, and I encourage you to get into it. It's excellent fun if you're a geek like me. Labels, hopefully you've all used labels before. Again, they're powerful library parts, so they're all coded with GDL, and they're an annotation tool that connect and display inherent information and annotations of Archicad model elements. Again, if we talk about that fire rating, if you've got a fire rating inside the wall, the label can connect that fire rating and represent it in the tag, okay, or in the label, should I say. So labels can be, because they're library objects, they can be customizable and provide consistent information on your displays, on your outputs. Obviously, because it's inherently connected, they automatically update. If that fire rating changes in the wall, then the fire rating will change in the label, okay, by association. Now, out of the box labels, they're okay for the most part. And in fact, I have heard many complaints of people saying, oh, but I do this and they don't do everything. Well, no, they don't do everything. But if you build a quality, if you build your information in a particular way and you use expressions and properties in a special way, then these out-of-the-box libraries labels are pretty good. They can give you more than what I think a lot of people know, and hence why I want to give this presentation today. So that's pretty much it with labels. And the last thing, a little bit left field, is interior elevations. And this is more about, for those who don't know what internal elevations or interior elevations are, they elevate the walls of internal spaces. Not just walls, they elevate internal spaces. The naming of them, more often than not, from what I see, and I see this a lot, naming is manual. And I don't like manual things, because if things change, manual doesn't change, automatic changes. So I've been using them in a particular way. I've been instructing people to use them in a particular way, because I think we should be automating where we can. So I'm going to show you how you can do that. It should be automated from when you first place them to the placement of the drawing on a layout. That shouldn't change. right? You shouldn't have to do anything. And of course, if that room changes, the room name changes for any reason, then it should flow all the way through to the documentation, okay? There's no need for manual naming, okay? Oops, that was that. Okay, so part 3, and that is best practices for organising and utilising this information. So that means getting into Archicad and explore some real-world examples. So let's have a look at that and see if we can get into that now. Okay, so this is a very simple project. As you can see, 2 rooms, right? 2 rooms. They're identical rooms, in fact, like mirror versions of themselves. Okay, a meeting room and an office, a couple of zones. Okay, right, very, very straightforward. Let's first look at properties. Okay, options, property manager. These are our properties. I've deleted all of the out-of-the-box ones. For the purposes of this demo, there's no value in them. I've got a couple of pre-created ones that I'm going to have a look at later. But first, let's create a new one. So we just come down here, click New, Demo Property, and click OK. It's now going to add itself to the bottom. I'm going to put it up to the top just because it's easier to find there for me. And it is a string. I don't want it to have any default value at this stage. I want it to be empty. And then we just click OK. Now, if you recall earlier conversation, create a property, it now makes itself available to the project, right? Okay, let's check. So if we click that wall, and up the top left here, notice that I've got wall classification. This is my classifications here, and these are my properties, right? This is the same as this down here on the wall selection settings dialog down the bottom. I've found now that because I use properties and classifications more, I want to get easier access to them. Typically, you'll find that they're way down here on the far right-hand end of this toolbar. I've now brought them using my work environment all the way to the left because I think that they need to be more accessible now. More like layers. They're something that you use a lot. So definitely consider that in your office. Anyway, as I said, click here and it'll be available. Well, it's not. And if you recall, I said that the only way that properties are available is if you assign them to a classification. So we need to assign it to a classification. So let's do that. Back up into the Property Manager dialog, and we select our property on the left, and on the right-hand side down here, we now need to choose the classifications, that we want to allocate it to. Please don't click all. All means that that property will be available to every single element in the project, meaning you're adding fields of information that are not relevant, therefore adding bloat to your project, not a good thing. Always be very specific about what that property, the purpose of what that property is. Okay, so we click Custom, Edit, and choose where it is going. I'm going to go in here to Wall, and I'm going to click that. And now all those subtypes of wall plus the wall is now selected. So I can choose any of these and classify my element with any of these, and that property will be available now. So if I click OK, and our wall is selected, and if we go up here, you'll see there it is. So inside there, we can go and call this whatever we want. Okay, demo test, done. We can go up here and click on this wall and say we want that to be demo tester. Okay. So that text is now sitting in those property fields, or in that property field, and is available inherent in that element, therefore available in other areas of Archicad. The first one to look at is the schedule. So I've prescribed a schedule here. As you can see, it's going to look at every single wall in the project from the ground floor story, and we're going to list the element type, which is wall. We're going to list the element ID, and we're also going to list this new property called property demo property. And if we click OK, you can now see that information that I added to that particular wall is now available in that property. And of course, if I go in here and I say I want to do another one, that is now going into the wall, obviously. Okay, So that could be something as simple as, it could be fire rating, acoustic rating, whatever it is. And so you can add that and change that information in a schedule as well as in the plan. Okay, so it's also pretty powerful. It's a database we're looking at, so the information is everywhere. Another location is in our graphic overrides. So if we go into our graphic overrides, one I prepared earlier, if we now add a property to that one there called the demo property, and it's asking now what the criteria of that property might be. And in this instance, I just want the information in that wall, that string. It's an open field to put whatever text you want in. If I just restrict it to, as long as the word contains, the field contains test, then we want it to highlight green. Okay, so if we click OK, and we click OK, any wall that has the word test in its field there will highlight green. So if I take out test, that one won't be green anymore. Okay, straightforward, simple. So those are pretty sort of similar ways of doing it. One thing that we may want to do, the problem with a string is that it allows people to put in whatever they want to. What if you want to be really restrictive? What if you wanted to say, just select from these selections? That's called an option set. So if we go into the options here and we click on here and we change this to option set, and we create our own option set, and maybe it's fire rating 1, fire rating 2, fire rating 3, for example. And why don't we just do one at the top as well, which is a blank one, and we choose the blank one as a default. Now, oops, I click OK. Now, whenever you, that's just doing a bit of a weird thing there, isn't it? Now, whenever you choose that property, you'll find that it is, I need to change this, of course, it has a drop down now, and it's a very defined list that people can choose from now. It doesn't allow you to add, any piece of text because we've restricted it to just that. So I find this is a really nice way to ensure consistency across documentation. And of course, when that information needs to be specific, then you want to be defined, because if it's specific and it's consistent, then at least you know that your graphic override is always going to be right as well. Okay, so that's a really nice way to do it. So that'll be a way to control things like fire rating, a way to control acoustic and thermal ratings as well. Okay, so they're pretty simple ways of using properties. So let's have a look at something a little bit more, complex. Right. So look at this office name. Okay. Notice that it is a zone label, not a zone stamp, and the zone label is taking its name from, or its code from, the zone name. Makes perfect sense. Okay. And of course, if I select the zone name is called office. Obviously, if I change it to restaurant, it's going to update to restaurant. Okay, very straightforward. But what if you've got someone in your office, in your organization, who says, in some documentation, I want it to be in lowercase, and other documentation, I want it to be in uppercase. How do you do that? Very simply, by using a very simple expression. So let's have a look at creating that expression. So if we go here to Property Manager, and we create a new one here, we call this demo expression, and I want to call this uppercase. Just trying to name things in a way that is accessible for people. They look at it and go, oh, I know what that is. I know what that's used for. That's important because you may end up in your project with dozens and dozens of properties. Okay, so we've got this one. It's an expression. It's an uppercase. And it's a string, data string, because it's text that we're looking for. I'm not going to get into too much detail around those, but what we do want is we want to write an expression. So the expression, we open up the expression editor by clicking expression. And what are we trying to do? We're trying to change the text to uppercase. Okay, so here we can get access to any of the properties that we want, right? And this is what I spoke about earlier. Properties and parameters, it's almost endless. There's an enormous number of amount of information we can get access to. Here is about lengths and measurements. I don't really care about that for this particular expression, but these are your functions. And these are the functions that we want to use. So if you recall, we want to do something that's sort of text related, and we want to uppercase, change the case to upper. So where might that be? Well, it's a text editing function. So we have a look down here, and we have a look down what ones are available to us. And you can see here there's one called uppercase. There's also one called lowercase. So if you have uppercase, you want to change to lowercase, you could indeed do that. So if we double click uppercase, and now if you hover your mouse over the word upper, it brings up a context menu. And that context menu gives you a description of what it is, an example. The example is not brilliant, but anyway, it's an example. And then it says underneath that, take note, argument type and result type. Those are important because they need to match your data type. So just be aware of that. Really common issue in expressions is when this occurs, when there's a mismatch between your data type and your resulting type. Okay. So what we need to do now is we need to define what our text is. Now, it's not the word office, right? It is a parameter that exists. And what is the parameter? It was zone name. So if we go up here to zone name, type in zone, and maybe I even need to put the name. There it is, zone name, double click. And because we don't have any errors here, it's going to work. But if I just put in a comma here or something, this means it's not going to work. So you just need to be aware of that. This says that there's a syntax error, meaning there is a problem with the syntax and how you've defined this particular statement. And when you get statements within statements, or functions within functions, and functions within functions, and embedded functions and things can get a little bit hairy. So you just need to work through that. Be patient. This will work because there are no errors. So if I click OK, next step, important step, let's assign it to classification. And again, we want this to be not walls this time, but spaces. And I'm okay with all internal and external spaces. So we click that, we click OK, and we go OK. Okay, so let's now do that. I've created a favorite over here that's going to kind of work. If I click tab zone office, now just if you recall, this label is the zone label 26. Okay, this is classification and properties label. Okay, so they're two different labels, but this label gives us access to other things that one doesn't. So that's why I'm using classifications and properties. So if I open up the label and I come down here to zone name, I don't want it to be zone name. I want it to be the property called demo expression uppercase. I click OK, done. And there it is. Okay, so of course, if I change that to a different name, what's going to happen? They both update. Okay, it's just a handy little one, and it didn't really take a lot of effort. That could be your first expression. I think it's a really nice one, a really simple one. Next one, let's have a look at something else a little bit more complex. What about wall types? Now, wall types are really interesting. Wall types, you've got a great tool called composites for that. And what I see a lot is when people want to annotate a wall type, they use the ID field. The ID field is disconnected from the composite. So it's actually bad practice. It's a risk to you. So let's just take the composite name. Easy. Let's just do that. So let's just use the, in fact, here, if I do this, and as I prepared earlier, that is a label, right? And it's a property label. And what it's doing is it's taking the ID, the element ID of the element. Okay. So of course, if I change the element ID of that wall, it's going to change. Right? That's a good thing, right? No, it's not a good thing. Because if I change this wall, that ID is not going to change, right? As you know, it's not going to change. And that's hopeless for us. We want it to change when we change the wall type. So how do we do that? Well, as I said, we have a label that we associate to the composite name. And there you go. And what's wrong with that? Well, for one, it's pretty big and probably not very accessible for anyone. So not my choice either. And of course, this is an out-of-the-box label called composite or profile name. So this then means, because we're using this particular label, it means that we've now got to rename all our composites so they just have the code, right? So if we go into our composites and we relabel all our composites to just have the code, that would be good, right? Not really. Not really. I think that's probably not so good, especially when you've got new people who don't understand the wall types. I just think it's not so good. I think it's best that you have a description as well. Okay. So is there a way that we can get perhaps that code off the front end and put it into a property? Well, let's have a look. That's where expressions come in. Okay. So let's have a look at how we might be able to do that. If we go into our properties here and we create a new property again this time, and we're going to call this one, what are we calling this one? We're going to call this one, sorry, I need to follow along with my, let's just do this. Demo, expression, wall type. Okay, there it is. Wall type. And now, again, it's an expression. What are we trying to do? Well, if you remember, the wall type is a long piece of text. And the wall type code had a delimiter at the end of it, a colon. Okay. And then after the colon, there was another whole lot of information. So what we want to do is we want to split that data. And we want to split it at the delimiter, at that column, and take the information to the left. Hence where we get the term split left. So let's have a look at that. If we go in here and it's a text editor we want. So we're looking for split left. Split string to left. String meaning that piece of text. And if you recall, our data type is string. So that's what we're doing, we're splitting the string. Again, hold my mouse over split left. It gives me a description, reminds me what I need to do, okay? So what is the text that we want to split? It is the composite name. So if we go here and we type in composite structure, perfect. What was our delimiter? Does anyone remember what the delimiter was? It was a colon. And what part index? Which number one of these do we want to do? And you'll find it is actually number 1. No errors. That is a good thing. Let's click OK. Remember, again, we must allocate a classification to it. Let's do that. Element, component, element, walls. Okay. Okay. Now, if we click a wall and we go up here and we have a look at this wall type and click that little thing, there you go, WT02. This one, expression, we click that little button there, WT05, WT05. So if we now go to our wall type expression, we double click and we place it. Notice it's still looking at the element ID at this stage. We're going to change that now. It's a property label. Again, property labels are incredibly flexible because we can pick out any property that we want to, even the expressions that we've just created. So let's go and change that and point it to that property, which is the wall type. Okay. And Bob is your uncle. There it is. So of course, if I change this to a different type, it's going to automatically update. W202. Okay. So that's pretty cool. It's a pretty good function to be able to do that. You don't need to change the way you name your composites. Well, as long as you have a code at the beginning, you don't need to change the way they work. But now you only have to display the code. And of course, expressions offer a lot more functionality than that. So you don't have to just get that information out. You could also take out the description if you want to. Maybe you want to do a wall type schedule and you want to have a schedule with the description and the code. And now because you've split it all out, you can start to use that information wherever you want to. Of course, remember, labels can be associated as many times as you want to an element. You're not restricted anymore. So you can format them any way you want to. So what if you could also take out information like fire rating, like the acoustic rating, like the thermal rating? Well, you can. And that's what I'm just going to show you now. I'm not going to take you through how to do it, but you can indeed do that. And I've done that with these properties called description. And you can see here I've got some code specifically for that. Note that if you build a composite wall, well, in fact, not a composite wall, but a complex profile wall, it is not a composite structure. It's different, so therefore you need to have an additional expression for that. They're identical other than the fact that they're taking the information from a different element type. Okay, element type, construction type element. So again, it's just a more nested split function. So it's going to, it'll look at the split right first, look at the split right from that delimiter, maybe the second delimiter, and then it will take the left information of that. So it's just, all it's doing is it's just looking for the delimiters, particular delimiters, and then it's looking at which side to take, and then it's taking the piece of information that it wants. And that's really all this is. I'm not going to get into the detail of it. Fire rating, same thing. It's structured almost identically. It's just delimiter or label it's looking for is in a slightly different location, but it's still the same function. The same with RW. It's looking for the term RW, right? Then it's taking the split left, split right, and then it's pulling it out. And the same with the R value. It's looking for the word R value. So as long as you have some delimiters and pieces of text that are common to the to the name, then the expression knows where to find it and knows how to pull the information out, right? And that's what I've done. So if we now look at these walls, this wall here, of course, and I open up the labels to it, you can see that the wall description was blockwork plasterboard. The fire rating is 60, 60, 60. The acoustic rating was RW32, and the R value is NA, right? And that applies to all of these. Now, the great thing about that is that, of course, it's never wrong. In theory, it's never wrong, but you're giving it the best chance to be right. This does mean you need many, many, many more composites. You need to manage them. Depends on the type of projects you're doing, but this is pretty good. The problem with these is the fact that the data sitting in those fields can be manually adjusted. So someone could go into this expression, into this fire rating here, right? One that says 60, 60, 60. They could in fact change that if they wanted to. And they could put whatever information in there and they wanted to. So maybe they wanted to do 90, 90, 90, right? And therefore the data's wrong, okay? That's something to be really mindful of with this. Now it can be checked, hence why I'm telling you. So there's a schedule that I have set up here that looks at, forget about that for now. It's looking at each of those different expressions that we created and looks for custom value, because custom value means that someone has gone in and changed the expression. So if it looks for these that are custom value, then it's going to highlight it here and tell you which one it is. In fact, the great thing about this is you could select it and you could select it on 2D and it will say this wall has changed, and you can see this wall has changed. It's selected. I can now go and check, go, okay, I can see that this is meant to be an expression. Go back here, change it to default expression. It'll now be back to the 60, 60, 60, done. Okay, if I go back to my schedule now, no, they don't appear. And that's a good thing. QA, super important. Okay, so of course you can set up another way to check that too, which I've got a graphic override. So of course, if I change this to something else, if I change this FRL to something else, no, of course it highlights. Okay. That's a good thing. And the same thing, of course, with these, of course. Once you've started to pull that data out into those properties and you have graphic overrides set up, you can get a fire ready plan like that. You can get your acoustic plan and you get your thermal plan, and no one's had to enter any information manually because it's all connected, which is good. Okay, of course, I'm not going to get into it, but you could, in fact, if you wanted to, you could name your surfaces with a code, a delimiter, and a description, and you could use expressions to pull those out, those codes out, and you could use the same property label, maybe configure differently with a circle or the whatever shape you want to, and place them on the elevation, right? So it's a pretty effective way to document those kind of things, and no GDL scripting required, no special labels. You can get them and make them function out of the box, primarily because of expressions. That's how good they are. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to show you was the interior elevation tool, okay, and how it may function. So we've got an internal elevation here, and if we have a look at those, it's pretty typical internal elevations, nothing special, but how they're named is, and I don't know if you've already noticed that they're called left, east, north, south, west, okay? And if I go in and change that particular name to ladies or whatever it needs to be, they change over here on the right-hand side in the view map. So they're changed again. So really straightforward. Basically what it is that the interior elevation itself, it looks at the zone name and displays it. That's as simple as all it is. So if I go to the settings for the internal elevation and I open up the settings for the internal elevation, you'll see that all I've done is under reference ID, I've put in zone name. So it just picks up the zone name. And then I look at orientation. Now there is a short orientation. Now these are actually shortcuts. You can actually click and add them in from here, like an auto text. There is a short orientation, which is NWES, or if it's northeast, it's NE, that kind of thing. I like the idea of having east, north, and the like. Okay. So the great thing also about this is, of course, whatever reason why that hasn't changed yet, I don't know. But anyway, should read ladies, not office. But anyway, the great thing about this is, of course, if we have a look at the east elevation, again, and I just want to show you, I'm just going to put in the word east here, right, east. If I go back to my plan and we change north, the location of north. So at the moment, north is, it's very slow today, a bit sluggish. Where is my north point? There it is. North is straight up the page at the moment. If I change north 90 degrees, right, these don't change. Notice they didn't change. But if I double click the east, it's a different elevation now, right? Because it takes into consideration the orientation of where north is. Okay, and this is the elevation that faces east. I'm not facing east, so it's not like an external elevation. They are different. Okay, they also take into consideration northeast. So if you did happen to have a 45 degree, notice that it changes here. Okay, so if we do that, it's the same one. But anyway, you get the picture. So they just rename. It's amazing. And then of course on the layout, if you go to your sheets and you go to your drawings, these all update automatically as well, which I think is also pretty powerful. As you can see, southwest, northwest, northeast, and so on again. And if you look at the drawing and we go to the settings of the drawing, what I've done is the drawing ID is by layout, as in it is the second drawing on the sheet. The plan is the first drawing on the sheet, and so on, right? But the drawing name is a combination of the ID and the name of the view, hence Ladies Southwest. Okay. Now we could change this and reconfigure it if you wanted to, whatever way you wanted to do it. It doesn't have to be the specific way I've done it, but it just goes to show that you can actually put this information in the front end and forget about it. And then when you place them, it's all automatic. And that is pretty much the end of my presentation. I don't have any more time. So I'd like to say thank you.